Have you ever given your all to someone only to be left heartbroken? This is the story of John, a kind and selfless man who stepped up to care for Sarah, a pregnant woman abandoned by the father of her child, Mike. For over a year, John provided love, support, and stability for Sarah and her baby, dreaming of a future together. But when Mike suddenly reappears, everything changes. This emotional roller coaster explores themes of love, betrayal, and resilience. Will John find the strength to move forward after such a devastating betrayal? Watch to find out. If this story resonates with you, share it with your loved ones, and let us know your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more gripping, true-life stories that touch the heart. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. The rain poured relentlessly, drumming against the windows of the small cafe where John sat, sipping his coffee. He glanced at his watch, wondering if he should head home when the door creaked open. A woman, drenched and visibly trembling, stepped inside. Her swollen belly caught his attention immediately. She was pregnant, maybe 6 months along. She looked around, her eyes wide with desperation, as if searching for someone who wasn't there. John hesitated for a moment, then waved her over. "You look like you could use a warm drink," he said, offering a kind smile. She hesitated, clutching her soaked coat, before finally sliding into the seat across from him. Her name was Sarah, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. As they talked, Sarah's story unfolded like a tragic novel. She revealed that the father of her unborn child was a married man named Mike. What started as a whirlwind romance had turned into a nightmare when Mike demanded she terminate the pregnancy. When she refused, he vanished, leaving her to face the harsh reality alone. John's heart ached as he listened. There was something about her vulnerability that stirred a protective instinct in him. But beneath her soft-spoken words, he sensed a lingering tension, as if she was holding something back. Why had she come to this cafe? Of all places, was it chance, or was she looking for someone or something? Before he could ask, Sarah's voice broke. "I don't know what to do," she confessed, tears streaming down her face. "I have nowhere to go." John made a decision in that moment, one that would change his life forever. "You're not alone anymore," he said firmly. "I'll help you." But as Sarah's eyes met his, filled with a mix of gratitude and something darker, something he couldn't quite place, John couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a storm far greater than the one outside. John's life took an unexpected turn the day he brought Sarah home. She was 6 months pregnant, vulnerable, and carrying the weight of betrayal from Mike, the married man who had abandoned her. John, a man of principle and compassion, couldn't stand by and watch her struggle alone. He offered her a place to stay, a safe haven where she could rebuild her life. But little did he know, this act of kindness would plunge him into a whirlwind of emotions: love, hope, and eventually heartbreak. The first few weeks were a blur of adjustments. Sarah's pregnancy was progressing, and John found himself stepping into roles he never imagined. He accompanied her to doctor's appointments, his heart racing every time the doctor mentioned potential complications. Sarah's eyes would well up with tears, and John would reassure her, "Everything will be okay. I've got you." When the time came for Sarah to give birth, John spared no expense. He booked her into a private hospital, ensuring she and the baby would receive the best care possible. The night of the delivery was tense. John paced the hospital hallway, his mind racing with worry. What if something went wrong? What if Sarah didn't make it? The thought sent a chill down his spine. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the doctor emerged with a smile. "It's a healthy baby boy," he announced. John's relief was palpable, but it was short-lived. Bringing Sarah and the baby home was both joyous and overwhelming. John's apartment, once a quiet bachelor pad, was now filled with the sounds of a crying newborn and the soft hum of Sarah's lullabies. He found himself waking up at odd hours to help with feedings, his exhaustion tempered by the sight of Sarah's grateful smile. But as the days turned into weeks, John began to notice subtle changes in Sarah. She seemed distant at times, lost in thought. He brushed it off as postpartum fatigue, but a nagging voice in the back of his mind whispered otherwise. Was she thinking about Mike? Did she still have feelings for him? John pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on the bond he was building with the baby. He couldn't deny it. He was growing attached, not just to the child but to Sarah as well. Yet, beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect arrangement, a storm was brewing. John's growing affection for Sarah and the baby was met with an unsettling uncertainty. Could he truly replace Mike in her heart? Or was he merely a placeholder, a temporary solution to her problems? The answers would soon reveal themselves. But for now, John clung to the hope that their new life together was just beginning. Little did he know, the foundation of their fragile happiness was about to crumble. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. John's small apartment, once a quiet sanctuary, was now filled with the sounds of a baby's laughter and Sarah's soft humming as she rocked the child to sleep. John had never imagined himself in this role. A stand-in father, a provider, a protector. Yet, as he watched Sarah cradle the baby, her eyes filled with gratitude, he felt a sense of purpose he hadn't known before. The baby, a bright-eyed boy named Liam, quickly became the center of their world. John would come home from work, exhausted but eager to hold the little one, to feel the tiny fingers wrap around his own. Sarah would smile at him, a smile that seemed to say, "You've saved us." And in those moments, John allowed himself to dream. He dreamed of a future where the three of them were a family, where he could call Sarah his wife and Liam his son. But beneath the surface of this newfound happiness, there was an undercurrent of tension. John couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Sarah would sometimes grow distant, her gaze drifting to the window as if waiting for someone. When he asked her about it, she would brush it off, saying she was just tired. John wanted to believe her, but the unease lingered, like a shadow he couldn't quite catch. Despite this, John poured his heart into building a life for them. He worked overtime, saving every extra penny for La Bola, the bride price that would make their union official. He imagined the day he would present the money to Sarah's family, the pride he would feel as he declared his intentions to marry her. He even started looking at houses, picturing Liam running through the yard, Sarah waiting for him at the door. One evening, as they sat together after putting Liam to bed, John finally gathered the courage to share his plans. "Sarah," he began, his voice steady but his heart racing, "I've been saving up. I want to pay La Bola. I want us to be a family, officially." Sarah's eyes widened, and for a moment, John thought he saw a flicker of panic. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. That's wonderful, John," she said softly. "You've done so much for us. I don't know how to thank you." John reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "You don't have to thank me. I love you, Sarah, and I love Liam. I just want to take care of you both." Sarah nodded, but her gaze drifted to the window again, and John felt a chill run down his spine. Was she hiding something? Or was he just imagining things? He pushed the thought aside, determined to focus on the future they were building together. But as the days passed, the shadow grew darker. Sarah's phone would buzz at odd hours, and she would quickly silence it, avoiding John's questioning looks. She started taking longer walks with Liam, returning with excuses about needing fresh air. John's unease turned to suspicion, but he buried it deep, unwilling to confront the possibility that the life he was building might be crumbling beneath him. The year came to a close, and Liam celebrated his first birthday with a small cake and balloons. John watched as Sarah blew out the candle, her face glowing with joy. For a moment, everything felt perfect. But as the night wore on and Sarah's phone buzzed once more, John couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in his chest. Something was coming, something that would change everything. And when it did, John would realize that the future he had envisioned was nothing more than a fragile dream, shattered by the return of a man who had no right to be part of their lives. The air in the house was warm, filled with the soft gurgles of the baby playing on the carpet. John sat on the couch, watching Sarah as she hummed a lullaby, her voice soothing and familiar. It had been a year since he'd taken her in, a year since he'd stepped into the role of protector, provider, and even father to the child who now felt like his own. Life had settled into a rhythm, and for the first time in a long while, John felt a sense of peace. But peace, as he would soon learn, is a fragile thing. The knock on the door was unexpected. It wasn't the soft tap of a neighbor or the hurried rap of a delivery person. It was firm, deliberate, and carried a weight that made John's stomach twist. He exchanged a glance with Sarah, who frowned slightly, her hands pausing mid-air as she folded a tiny onesie. "I'll get it," John said, rising from the couch. He walked to the door, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence of the room. When he opened it, the man standing there was a stranger, and yet, not entirely. He was tall, with sharp features and a confident stance. His eyes darted past John, searching the room behind him. "Is Sarah here?" he asked, his voice smooth but edged with something John couldn't quite place. John's heart skipped a beat. "Who's asking?" The man extended a hand, a faint smile playing on his lips. "I'm Mike, the baby's father." The words hit John like a punch to the gut. He froze, his mind racing. Mike, the man who had abandoned Sarah when she needed him most. The man who had left her to face pregnancy alone. And now, here he was, standing on John's doorstep, as if he had every right to be there. Sarah appeared behind John, her face pale. "Mike," she whispered, her voice trembling. Mike's eyes softened as he looked at her. "Hey, Sarah, I've been doing a lot of thinking. I want to be part of my child's life." John's fists clenched at his sides, but he forced himself to stay calm. "You've got some nerve showing up after all this time," he said, his voice low and steady. Mike shrugged, unfazed. "I know I messed up, but I'm here now, and I want to make things right." The room seemed to shrink, the tension thickening with every passing second. John glanced at Sarah, searching her face for some sign of how she felt. But her expression was unreadable, a mix of shock, confusion, and something else, something that made John's chest tighten. "Can I come in?" Mike asked, his tone polite but insistent. John hesitated, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. He wanted to slam the door in Mike's face, to protect the life he'd built with Sarah and the baby. But he also knew he couldn't deny Mike's role as the biological father. "Fine," John said finally, stepping aside. "But this doesn't mean anything." As Mike walked into the house, John couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. The peace he'd fought so hard to build was slipping through his fingers, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The storm had arrived, and John wasn't sure if he, or his heart, would survive it. The air in the room was heavy, thick with unspoken words. John had noticed the change in Sarah over the past few weeks. The distant looks, the hesitant pauses, the way she avoided his eyes when he spoke about their future. He had chalked it up to stress, the demands of motherhood, or perhaps the lingering shadows of her past. But tonight, as they sat across from each other at the dinner table, the tension was palpable. The baby was asleep, and the house was eerily quiet, save for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. "John, we need to talk," Sarah finally said, her voice trembling. Her hands fidgeted with the edge of the tablecloth, her gaze fixed on the untouched plate of food in front of her. John's heart skipped a beat. He had heard those words before, in movies and stories, and they never ended well. "What is it, Sarah?" he asked, his voice steady, but his mind racing. He reached across the table to take her hand, but she pulled away, a gesture that felt like a knife to his chest. She took a deep breath, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I still have feelings for Mike," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hung in the air like a storm cloud, dark and foreboding. John froze, his mind struggling to process what he had just heard. Mike? The same Mike who left you when you needed him the most? The same Mike who didn't care about you or the baby? His voice rose, a mix of anger and disbelief. Sarah, he's married. He abandoned you. How can you still have feelings for him? Sarah's tears spilled over, streaming down her cheeks. I know how it sounds, John. I know what he did, but he's the father of my child, and he wants to be part of our lives now. He says he's changed, that he regrets everything. And I still love him. John felt as though the ground had been ripped out from under him. What about us? He asked, his voice cracking. What about everything we've built? I've been here for you, for the baby. I've loved you, supported you, planned a future with you. And now you're just going to throw that away for him? Sarah looked away, unable to meet his gaze. I'm sorry, John. I never meant to hurt you. But I have to follow my heart. I have to give him another chance. The room seemed to spin as John struggled to breathe. He had given her everything, his time, his money, his love, and now she was choosing the man who had once discarded her like she meant nothing. The betrayal cut deeper than any wound he had ever known. So that's it? He asked, his voice hollow. You're leaving me for him? Sarah nodded, her tears falling faster now. I have to, John. I'm sorry. John stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He felt a surge of anger, of pain, of disbelief, but he swallowed it all down. Fine, he said, his voice cold and final. If that's what you want, then go. But don't expect me to be here when he breaks your heart again. With that, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving Sarah alone with her tears and the weight of her decision. The ticking of the clock grew louder, a relentless reminder of the time they had lost and the future that would never be. The tension in the room was palpable, the kind that makes your skin crawl and your heart race. John sat on the edge of the couch, his hands clasped tightly together, his knuckles white. Sarah stood by the window, her back to him, staring out at the fading sunlight. The baby was asleep in the next room, oblivious to the storm brewing between the two adults who had been his world for the past year. Sarah, John began, his voice steady but laced with unease. We need to talk about this. You can't just drop something like that and walk away. She turned slowly, her eyes avoiding his. Her face was a mask of conflict, but there was a resolve in her posture that made John's stomach churn. John, I can't explain it. I just feel like I have to give him a chance. He's the baby's father, and he wants to be part of our lives now. I owe it to my child to try. John's chest tightened, his mind racing. What about us? What about everything we've built? I've been here for you, for the baby. I paid for the hospital. I've taken care of you both. And now you're just going to leave me for the guy who walked out on you when you needed him most? Sarah's voice trembled as she finally met his gaze. I know what you've done for me, John, and I'll never forget it. But this isn't about gratitude. It's about feelings. I still love him. I try to push it away, but I can't. The words hit John like a punch to the gut. He stood up, his voice rising despite his efforts to stay calm. So what? You're going to be his side chick again? After everything he put you through? Do you even hear yourself? Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't back down. I know it doesn't make sense to you, but this is my decision. I have to do what's best for my child. And for me, John felt the room spin around him. The future he had envisioned, the family, the love, the life they had planned together, was crumbling before his eyes. And what about me, Sarah? What about what's best for me? I gave you everything. I was saving for La Bola. For God's sake. I thought we were building something real. She looked away, her voice barely a whisper. I'm sorry, John. I never meant to hurt you. But I have to follow my heart. The silence that followed was deafening. John sank back onto the couch, his mind a whirlwind of anger, betrayal, and disbelief. He had given so much, only to be cast aside for a man who had once thrown her away like she was nothing. As Sarah turned to leave the room, John's voice stopped her. If you walk out that door, Don't expect me to be here when you realize he's going to break your heart again." She paused, her hand on the doorknob, but she didn't look back. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving John alone in the suffocating silence. The baby stirred in the next room, a faint cry breaking the stillness. John sat there, staring at the closed door, his heart heavy with the weight of a love that had been thrown away. He had been her rock, her savior, but in the end, it wasn't enough. And as the reality of her decision sank in, John felt the first cracks forming in the walls he had built around his heart. The house felt emptier than ever. The faint scent of baby powder still lingered in the air, a cruel reminder of what once was. John sat alone on the couch, staring at the empty crib in the corner of the room. His mind raced, replaying every moment, every promise, every plan he had made with Sarah. The future they had dreamed of together now felt like a distant mirage, slipping further and further out of reach. He clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms as he tried to steady his breathing. How could she do this? After everything he had done for her, after he had given her a home, paid for the birth, cared for her and the baby as if they were his own, she had chosen him. Mike, the man who had abandoned her when she needed him most. The man who had only returned when it was convenient. John's thoughts spiraled. He remembered the nights he had stayed up, rocking the baby to sleep so Sarah could rest. The sacrifices he had made, the money he had saved for La Bola, the plans he had sketched out for their future. He had even pictured the baby calling him Dad. But now all of that was gone. A cold wave of anger washed over him, but it was quickly replaced by a hollow ache. He wasn't just hurt, he was disappointed. Disappointed in Sarah, in himself, in the world. How could he have been so blind? He had trusted her, loved her, and she had thrown it all away for a man who didn't deserve her. The room seemed to close in around him, the walls pressing down as if to crush him under the weight of his thoughts. He stood abruptly, pacing the floor, his mind a whirlwind of questions. Would he ever be able to trust again? Could he ever open his heart to another woman, knowing how easily it could be shattered? As he stared out the window into the dark night, a chilling thought crept into his mind. What if this wasn't the end? What if Sarah came back, begging for forgiveness? Would he take her back? Or would he turn her away? The uncertainty gnawed at him, a relentless itch he couldn't scratch. John's reflection in the window stared back at him, a shadow of the man he once was. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: he would never be the same again. The question was, would he rise from the ashes, or would he let this betrayal consume him? The clock ticked loudly in the silence, each second a reminder of the life he had lost. And as the night deepened, John couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a long, painful journey. The house felt emptier than ever. The faint scent of baby powder still lingered in the air, a cruel reminder of the life John had built and lost. He sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the empty bassinet in the corner. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards, as if the house itself mourned with him. John's mind raced, replaying every moment of the past year. The late-night feedings, the laughter, the whispered promises of a future together. How could it all unravel so quickly? Sarah's words echoed in his head like a haunting refrain. I still love him. The betrayal cut deeper than he cared to admit. He had given her everything, his time, his money, his heart, only to be cast aside for a man who had once abandoned her. The sound of his phone buzzing on the table startled him. He glanced at the screen, half expecting it to be Sarah, maybe calling to say it was all a mistake. But it was just a notification, a reminder of the savings account he'd been building for La Bola. The irony was almost laughable. He had been saving for a future that no longer existed. As the hours dragged on, John's thoughts grew darker. He wondered if Mike had ever truly cared about Sarah, or if this was just another game to him. What if he hurt her again? What if she came back, begging for forgiveness? Would he take her in, or had she burned that bridge forever? The questions swirled in his mind, each one more torturous than the last. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows. John stood and walked to the door, half expecting to see Sarah standing there, tears streaming down her face. But the porch was empty, the street deserted. The world moved on, oblivious to his pain. He returned to the couch, his heart heavy but his resolve hardening. He couldn't change the past, but he could choose how to move forward. The road ahead was uncertain, shrouded in shadows, but John knew one thing for sure. He would survive this. He had to. What would you do if you were in John's shoes? This heartbreaking story of love, sacrifice, and betrayal leaves us with so much to reflect on. What lesson did you take away from it? Would you have handled things differently? Or do you think John did the right thing by supporting Sarah and her baby, even after everything that happened? Let us know in the comments below. We'd love your thoughts. If this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with your loved ones and start a conversation about love, trust, and resilience. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss another powerful true life story like this one. Thank you for watching, and remember, every story has a lesson. What's yours?